All right, so how many of you here who are in motion have seen the film River Blue? Okay, so there is an opportunity, actually, opening? November 19th in San Francisco. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to make the plug for you now, just before I don't want to forget. November 19th, San Francisco, and the location?
The Roxy.
The Roxy. So I had an opportunity to see this film, and it was in Sebastopol, and I went with colleagues Heidi Harris, Dustin Kahn, Nick Wenner, and Matt Forkin, who we'd all been working on, well, most of us had been working on a project called True Blue, which you're going to hear about shortly. But we all as a team who are working on grassroots community-based solutions to the color blue had this opportunity to collectively go to a movie theater and watch Roger's work. And it's actually one of the reasons why we're contextualizing the work we are doing today, because the idea of making sure that we seat the work of our community in a larger global context is really important. And so it helps us remind ourselves of the gravity and the importance of our small acts in the face of these larger narratives that have that very daunting feeling. So again, we're going to go in and explore the problem, which Roger does so actually beautifully and elegantly, and then again we'll follow up with what's happening here now that is an amelioration response to that which you have done such a beautiful job documenting. So thank you for being here all the way from Vancouver, Roger.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was rather nice. Yeah, I'm just a filmmaker, and so I'm humbled actually to be in front of you people who are actually doing real work and doing everything so well. And it's interesting, when I started the film, I was really looking for positives, and we started the film actually almost 5 years ago in a research stage, and I really couldn't find much for positives at that point in time. But as things progress, of course, there's more and more positives coming out, and so what you people are doing is tremendously important work, and thank you for that. I think, let me see if I can work this thing. So the film I produced is called River Blue, and it actually started in film festivals last October. We've been in about 50 film festivals. We've won awards in Madrid and London and Arizona and Eugene and all around the world, so we're very proud of this film. It's definitely a passion project, and we just wanted to do it kind of because we wanted to do it, and I wanted to go take a look at the world and kind of what's going on. So what I'll do is I'll play the video. There's a 2-minute little trailer of the film.
The wars of the future will not be fought about oil. The wars of the future is going to be fought about water.
We have a very small amount of water, and that's got to accommodate the needs that humans have for drinking water, and a lot of that water is not accessible.
We are committing hydrocide. We are deliberately murdering our rivers.
Our rivers across the world were being deeply impacted by the dumping of poisonous, toxic material.
Every single piece of clothing that you buy comes with a cost.
The fabric dyes used contain hazardous materials, things like mercury, cadmium, and lead.
These kind of chemicals, they don't break down, and they travel around the world.
This water is so toxic, there is no aquatic life.
If you see how people are living there, they have lost their sensory adaptation. They can't smell anymore.
They do have problems with drinking water supply. There's a high incidence of liver cancers.
If we continue like this, it's done. It's done.
Maybe it's because the demand of the world has gone crazy.
We are on the verge of a global economic expansion. In a few moments, I will sign the North American Free Trade Act into law.
The statistics are insane. Something like 80 billion garments of clothes are being delivered out of factories.
Where do these products go? Those products are actually sold to the world's biggest brand names.
A lot of companies do things that are very, very hidden and very secret.
So the pipe is underground. You cannot really see this factory that is dumping this.
this water is being put into this irrigation canal. So this has entered the food chain.
You don't learn the details because at the end of the day, it's not a selling point.
The consumer did not wake up one morning saying, I want to buy 5 pairs of jeans for a fraction of the price. We were literally introduced to this concept by the fashion industry.
Buying something at a lower price, you're actually contributing to the death, illness, suffering of people in some other part of this world.
We could save the planet if the planet won.
If you have 2 jeans, one is damaging the planet, the other one not, and the price is the same, no one will choose the wrong one. I mean, there's no excuse.
I think all corporations have to be accountable for their environmental practices, and no one has a right to damage or destroy a river.
So that's the film. Thank you. So that's River Blue, and that's actually we're going to be releasing it in this global release starting November 19th, and we're going to be in about 20 cities. We've actually partnered with Orsola de Castro, who was in the film, and she's one of the co-founders of Fashion Revolution from London. And she's doing amazing work as well. So they're a grassroots organization, and they're fairly global, and they're helping us to put together the theaters and promote and doing all that stuff. And so on November 19th in San Francisco at the Roxy at 7 p.m. we're having River Blue. There will be a panel afterwards. My producing partner Lisa will be there. I will be in New York at another screening, and we have other people going to different places as well. So it's a big release for us, and then after that, of course, it's going to be online, and that'll be kind of at the end of November, early December. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I've been a filmmaker for about 30 years, but I've never done an environmental film, and I wanted to. So I was looking at water issues because I live up in Vancouver, Canada. There's, near the ocean, and I know there's water issues everywhere around the world, and I see big freighters and they're pumping stuff out, and I'm going, what's in that water? So I was looking at all kinds of different issues, and what happened is we came across a satellite photo from China, and there's this blue-black stain coming out of China, and I went, what's that about? And so in further investigation, we found out it was actually from blue jeans, and I'm wearing blue jeans, and I still like them. But I'm trying to find better ones, and we are doing that. So anyways, in the research, it really became quite apparent that blue jeans, which again, most of us own a pair, are incredibly toxic for the most part, and the way that they're being manufactured in most of the countries of the world where they are is really detrimental to the waterways of the world. So I wanted to do something on water, and where we started was actually in London. The reason we started in London for really is a couple of reasons, and that is the Thames River, and my central character, Mark Angelo, who's in one of these kayaks. Mark actually is a pretty world-famous paddler. He's paddled in over 1,000 rivers around the world. He also created World Rivers Day, and he's an educator. And I talked to him and I said, Mark, can I take you around the world and you can give us a state of the nation of what's going on in rivers, and I have this angle on fashion. And he was like, yeah, I'll do that. So, and who wouldn't, right? So anyways, I took Mark around, and we stopped in London, one of our first stops, and he really wanted to go back here because he had paddled the Thames 40 years ago, and it was biologically dead at that point. And again, going back into the 1800s, it was biologically dead then. In fact, we even heard of a story that was kind of sadly interesting, and that was a passenger ferry was going across in about 1850, and it sank. Everybody died, but nobody drowned. And so I was like, what's that about? Well, there was no oxygen for the first 3 to 4 feet because it was that dead. So there was no plant life, the water was just that dead on the Thames. And so, of course, today you can paddle it. There's 120 species of fish back in the river. And excuse me, and of course there's lots of plant life around there. So the Thames, that's an area of hope, and because they have spent a tremendous amount of time in the last 50 years rehabilitating that river. So it's kind of the situation that Mark always says is you should never give up on any river because they can all come back. They're probably never going to be perfect again, but they certainly can get a lot of life back in them. So I got a couple of notes here. So that's why we started in London. And then after London, I got that right? That actually is part of London as well, and a subsidiary of the Thames. And again, there you can still see some of the old boats. There's still lots of work to be done, but again, it's actually coming back, and again, there's at least something positive going on there. And there's some great groups. There's a group called Thames 21, which is rehabilitating the river quite nicely. So after that, we went to Africa. Mark really wanted to get back to Africa and see some of the wildlife that he had paddled with in the past. And this is the Zambezi River, and this is kind of what he calls, how a river should and could be, because it's really harmonious with people. Although there's not that many people, there's certainly a lot of Africans that live around the river, and they're actually in pretty a healthy state, both the humans and the animals in this part of the Zambezi. And again, some nice hippos. We got pretty close to the hippos. They got a little agitated. Mark Mark didn't want to get too close. He's been there before. And again, after Africa, we ended up in Kanpur in India. Kanpur is probably one of the most toxic places I've ever been in the world. There's a couple others that probably top it, but it was pretty awful. And the way that people live, the chemical usage, the dyes running openly free in the street. And of course, you've heard about the blue dogs of India, and these guys are just running around in the streets, and it is awful. Now, to hear about the sheep that are glowing in the dark and whatever else, that's a whole other level as well. So, but this is what, unfortunately, we have been doing to a lot of parts in the world. India is fascinating. We were there actually for Kumbh, and Kumbh is the biggest gathering of mankind in the world. Over 55 days, I believe it's 120 million people showed up in a 15-kilometer area. And that's the confluence of the Yamuna and the Ganges River, and it's a very holy, spiritual place. And one of the days that we were there, in fact, this particular day, we were working with this young gentleman, 30 million people were in the river. So when you have that many humans in there and very few facilities in India, which they say there's about 600 million people in India that don't have access to either clean drinking water or facilities. So it's pretty unbelievable. But what's amazing about India is they have this great reverence for their rivers, and they really believe in the beauty of the rivers. But at the same time, they're doing some really detrimental things. Kanpur, which the last slide, is actually upriver of this area. And, again, all the dyes coming out of the chemicals, all the rest of it being poured into the Ganges up there, and then coming down by 30 million people. And although the government had stopped some of the effluent from being released, what actually happened is the dyers and those factories up there were just releasing things late at night. So that, a few hours later, it's actually perfect timing for the humans to go swimming. So that was pretty unbelievable. And that's, again, another shot of Kumbh. And again, it's highly religious ceremonies. There are people that take jugs of water home, and some of them looked worse than the black bean dye stuff that I saw outside. And some of them will drink that throughout the year because it's such a religious event for them. And they believe in the river so much, and they believe that it's actually clean when We talked to scientists there, and of course it is pretty much biologically dead in that area as well. So that's kind of sad. This gentleman, Pinaki Roy, he was in the trailer. He's actually an environmental journalist in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And Dhaka is, without doubt, the worst place I've ever been. It is the most polluted. The smell of chemicals in the air is unbelievable. Children truly do lose their sensory smells and whatever else. They lose all that. 10 years old. Life expectancy is 45 to 50 maybe. I was by far the oldest person that I saw around Bangladesh. Pinaki is doing an outstanding job of bringing these things to his own community, but it is also, what I found out when we were there, it is one of the most dangerous places in the world. There is a lot of terrorist activity actually in Dhaka, and we were only there for about 10 days, and probably 50 to 100 people a day were killed in fire bombings. And Pinaki actually, we traveled with him everywhere. He was our local guide, and he certainly kept us safe, which I'm very grateful for. And Pinaki also took us right into some of these factories, leather factories, and what we're able to see, of course, is children without any sort of protection, walking around bare feet and playing with acids and all kinds of stuff. So it was a pretty brutal reality that I saw over there. El Paso, I came back to El Paso, and we actually traveled through 11 different countries. I can't touch on all of them, but El Paso actually used to be the blue jean capital of the world before it moved over to China. And what happened with El Paso is actually NAFTA. So we touched on NAFTA before NAFTA became a little more famous lately. But the free trade agreement, what happened is those big manufacturers, when that was signed, they went, we don't have to be in the States anymore. We can be anywhere. Let's go to Mexico. And then they were in Mexico and they went, we can be anywhere in the world. We don't have to be in Mexico. Where is it the cheapest? They weren't looking at what the environmental cost or damage was. They were just looking at where can we go that the labor's the cheapest, the mills might be there, or we can create an infrastructure. So that's why they ended up going to China and Bangladesh and Vietnam and all these other places. So we touched into El Paso to talk a little bit about NAFTA and what has happened and how the world has changed. Another shot of El Paso, and it's pretty depressed at this point in time. Housing's pretty inexpensive if you want to go to El Paso. We ended up back in LA, and we met a couple of young guys, Eric Dickstein and Lucas Eichmann, and these guys are kind of like a lot of you people. They're doing stuff on just a micro level, and they're looking at how they can make denim and jeans in a much more sustainable way. So we caught up with them and saw how they were doing things, and it was pretty fascinating for me to be able to, because they're looking at all kinds of new technology and ozone, and they're looking at natural dyes as well. So they're young, hip, cool guys. I really liked what they're up to. Francois Gerbeau, who's in a film, has been a designer for many, many years, and he actually created acid wash and potassium permanganate and all that kind of stuff. And he actually, about 10 years ago, he wanted to change things because he realized what he was helping to do to the world. So he actually, I think I've got a slide here. Oh, no. He went to a company called Genologia in Spain, and we went to them as well, and learned about how they are building on a much bigger and mass production scale the laundry facilities for dyeing and for distressing denim, and using, again, ozone and different technologies of lasers and this sort of thing. So they are now selling this equipment worldwide to a lot of denim manufacturers, and they're being quite successful. And it's really, part of that is due to Francois going to them and saying, we have to help change things. So here's a guy who's mid-70s now, and he is just adamant that he's going to help change the world because he helped create the other world. So it's pretty cool to see. Everlane's a company I just came across recently, and one of the things I like about them is they seem to be quite transparent. So I like to see things where people are trying to be transparent. I also, on the flip side of that, there's a large manufacturer who I just recently read a quick ad, and it said, "We treat water responsibly." And I'm like, well, I know you don't. And I've been to some of your factories, and you know, so there's a whole lot of greenwashing. That was talked about a little earlier as well. So these guys may not be perfect. There's lots of other jean manufacturers, there's just about nobody's perfect. So, but the whole idea is we got to be looking at transparency. You guys are already there, but I'm taking this to the world, and I'm trying to teach them as well that they as consumers have a choice, and they should be asking how their product is being made. And again, we talked about dyes, and I just met this woman recently. Go back. Tracy Martin. She has a book coming out. She's from Arizona, and again, you guys are already there. You guys are doing everything she's probably doing, and I just think it's pretty fascinating that we're already getting into this. Again, when I started this film, I couldn't find a whole lot about this. Now we're starting to see it. Now that's great. And then back to you guys, which is Fibershed and soil to soil. And I'm like, when I heard about Fibershed, I went, okay, I should have done more research apparently a couple of years ago. But I didn't know about it, when I started this film. And again, as we went through the film, I started finding out more and more. And even in the last 6 months, I've found out a lot more information. And we very well could do a sequel to River Blue in the next couple of years as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a story of River Blue. If there's a question? There's a question.
Not to put a damper on the one kind of positive story, but you talked about the cleaning up the River Thames. In your experience of seeing the manufacturing around there, how much of that had to do with just the outsourcing of the most toxic manufacturing that may have once been part of the English economy that's now outsourced to, say, Bangladesh?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question, and it's about outsourcing and what the pollution of the Thames is like now, and maybe what it still could be like if they were doing a lot of that manufacturing. The fact of the matter is they have really strong environmental laws, so they had to change things. That also happened in Italy and most of Europe. We visited a factory in Italy that is making denim called Ital Denim, and what a fascinating story that is, because they're using solar and steam to regenerate and get their own electricity. They are starting to use natural dyes. They're using natural fixing agents. They've taken out 19 chemicals, so that is happening in Europe right now. So it may not be perfect, the Thames, and a lot of that again came from the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of it, yes, was now outsourced, or the practices have changed and have become much more environmentally sustainable. Europe is way ahead of what North America is, and North America is way ahead of what Asia is, from what I'm seeing. Bangladesh, actually, and just as a side note, they actually have very strong environmental laws, and we talked to the top environmental lawyer of Bangladesh. They just don't have a will to follow it, and the reason they don't have a will to follow it is that the manufacturers make up about 25% of the government people, MLAs. So there's problems all over the place, but I think we can look to some of these other countries and start implementing some of those type of practices to clean rivers, clean waterways, so that we don't have a bunch of microthreads that we're drinking in our water as well, right? Thank you very much.